In 7 career games against Victor Wembanyama, Nikola Jokic has averaged 37 points and 9 assists on 62% true shooting, while leading the Nuggets to a 5-2 record. Every matchup between these two feels like must-watch TV, and this most recent one was no different. The Spurs, who had won 26 of their last 27 with Wemby in the lineup, went into Denver and lost an overtime thriller, where Joker once again stuffed the stat sheet. So how does he do it? And why is he seemingly immune to Wemby's coverage? In today's video, sponsored by PrizePicks, we're going to figure out why Wemby hasn't been able to slow him down. Because, as we all know, Victor's in the midst of one of the greatest defensive seasons we've ever seen. The size, length, and agility to cover ground are one thing. He's finally figured out the reads. And now that he's seen a bunch of different types of offenses, knows where to be, when to get there, he completely warps the dynamic of the sport. San Antonio's scheme is built around keeping him as close to the basket as possible. When he's there, offenses aren't. So against weaker pick-and-roll ball handlers, he'll camp out in a deep drop. Against teams with weaker shooters, you'll often see him cross-match, allowing him to freely roam behind the play as a last line of defense. And to hold that position, the Spurs like to pre-switch a lot, letting him guard whoever's in the weak side corner so that he's always able to rotate to the rim. This makes life so much easier for his teammates. If they get beat on the perimeter, he's there. If they get caught ball watching and lose a cutter, he's there. Against certain actions, they can get aggressive and put 2 on the ball, knowing that he's more than capable of erasing 2-on-1 advantages. So they leverage this into their scheme. Wemby's job is to take away the rim. Everybody else's job is to take away the 3-point line by bringing constant pressure, not over-helping, closing out hard in rotation, and chasing ball handlers over screens to funnel offenses into Victor. When opponents get a high number of 3s up, it's usually by design. They love to intentionally make bad shooters up their volume, which is a big reason why they're holding opponents to under 35% shooting on corner 3s, number 1 in the league. Teams can't get to the rim when Wemby's on the court, and in the rare event they do, the shot quality is diminished. Teams can't get a high number of 3s up unless they're being given up to their worst shooters by design. That leaves the mid-range, a sweet spot that you can access before you run into that wall in front of the basket. The problem is that for most of the league, this just isn't a good shot. If we break the court up into 4 levels and look at the average points per shot attempt, the mid-range is leaps and bounds less efficient than the 3-point line, let alone the rim. For reference, the average half-court offense is generating 0.98 points per possession, so the mid-range is anywhere from 10 to 15 points below that mark. As a result, the Spurs are a historically dominant defense with Wemby on the court. With a defensive rating of 106.5, they're about 10 points better than average. He almost single-handedly turns them into an all-time unit, hence why he'll run away with the Defensive Player of the Year award. But all of this does beg the question, what happens when you go up against the most efficient mid-range player ever? So much can be said about what makes Jokic an all-time great, such as his ability to stretch defenses out to the 3-point line, the fact that he's a 7-footer who can make every pass under the sun, the way he uses his size and footwork to create high-percentage shots for himself on the block. It all plays a role, don't get me wrong, but I personally think that his single biggest superpower is how he's able to take a shot that's generally regarded as one of the worst in basketball and turn it into a layup. The shot I'm referring to is this area of the court right here, the short mid-range. If we define the short mid-range as shots between 4 and 14 feet away from the basket, nobody comes remotely close. Since the 2021 season when he first became an MVP, he's led the NBA in volume at over 6.5 attempts a game. What makes this so crazy though is that he's also led the NBA in accuracy, making 59% of these shots. I can't even begin to describe how absurd that is. Players don't lead the league in both volume and efficiency on specific shots. It just doesn't happen. Even the best 3-point shooters in NBA history couldn't get up to the heights of guys who only took open looks. Even the best finishers couldn't get up to the heights of guys who only took layups in transition. To ramp up your volume to a league best level while making them at a higher clip than anyone, you have to be an outlier among outliers, and that's what we've seen from Joker. His dominance in this area of the court comes down to 2 key traits, his size and his touch. Because he's 6'11", 280 pounds, he's able to create separation with his body and get the ball up over defenders with ease. And then it just feels like he never misses, regardless of whether or not he's forced to change his release angle, the timing, or the amount of arc on his shot, it's dropping more times than not. And there's basically nothing you can do to take it away. That's because of how many different ways he can access this area of the floor. From the post, he's got a wide array of counters. After setting a screen, he'll look for the shot out of the short roll. Even on perimeter drives, he knows how to get some space. And in the past 3 years, Wemby's had a chance to get the entire experience. Before we get into that though, I want to thank PrizePicks for sponsoring today's video. If you know you can play responsibly and you have the means to do so, PrizePicks is America's #1 app for sports picks. So if you're looking for a place to get in on the action before the NBA playoffs, use code HMA and get started. Today, we've got both Wemby and Jokic on the slate. The Spurs are taking on the Sixers, and with the way they like to defend, I think a lot of shots could get funneled to Paul George. He's been on fire, so I'm taking him for more than 17.5 points. The Nuggets are up against Portland, who like to overhelp on the paint and make weaker shooters take corner threes. Christian Brown's coming off a hot shooting night. I think he'll make at least one outside shot. And it's that simple. Find the stat you want, pick more or less, and you've got your lineup. If you sign up for PrizePicks with code HMA and play $5, you get $50 in lineups. So download the app or click the link in the description to get started, and let me hear your picks down in the comments. The battle between Wemby and Jokic starts in the post, a true chess match where they've been trying to figure each other out for years. On one hand, Jokic is built like a tank, so historically he's been able to get up into Wemby's body and bump him off his spot to create separation. On the other hand, it sometimes doesn't matter, because when you have an 8-foot wingspan, you can afford to give up a few inches of space and still get a hand on the ball. For that reason, Jokic's attack has to be all about timing, finding the exact moment he can catch Wemby off balance and sneak the ball through. Usually what he'll look to do is leverage his strength and work his way close to the basket before throwing an up fake or two to get Wemby off the ground. He's not always going to bite on these fakes though. He's gotten a lot better at staying on his feet and trusting his size, which means Jokic has to play the game of angles to perfection. If not, stuff like this happens. Luckily, Jokic is a master of angles. Here's one where he starts to attack the middle of the floor before turning back to his right hand, which gets Wemby stuck on his hip. Then it's a patient finish. And he went right back to that exact same move in crunch time, attacking the middle, spinning back to his right. Only this time Wemby has a much better angle, so instead of a layup, it's a jump hook off the top of the glass. Wemby can adjust too though. In this most recent game, Jokic tried to set him up again, but now he's ready for that spin to his right hand, so he sits on that shoulder, forcing an awkward attempt with the left. I think that's what makes this matchup so fun. This was their 7th time facing off. They're still trying to figure each other out, and while they each get their wins, some stuff there just isn't an answer for. That's where Jokic's short mid-range game comes in. A perfect understanding of timing and angles is one thing. Automatic shot making from any spot within 12 feet of the basket is another, and he's a master of creating separation. Typically, when he attacks downhill, bumps, and spins to his right, he's looking for a short jump hook. Against Wemby, he instead steps way back and skies it up over his length. You can never show him the same move twice though. When that one got pulled out again 2 years later, he timed it up perfectly. So it's all about diversity. Sometimes Jokic will face up and look to counter as a jump shooter. This is every bit as automatic as those jump hooks, and because his release point is so high, there's no real way to contest it without overplaying. But as soon as he feels Wemby getting a bit too aggressive, he fakes the jumper, attacks the middle, gets into his body, and goes to the hook. Everything culminated on this play though. 1 minute left in overtime, Denver up by 2.
Here's that MVP matchup. Jokic fading away. Ridiculous! Oh my gosh. Wow.
He put this game away with his signature Sombor shuffle, a move that embodies his unrivaled combination of size, footwork, and touch. But the duel between Jokic and Wemby is always about so much more than just the isolation game. Most big defenders aren't able to get around screens, so a Jokic staple against these giant rim protectors is to make them do exactly that. This last game was all about inverted pick and roll, where he gets the ball near the elbow, Murray sets a screen, and he comes off of it to get to that floater. Wemby's natural instinct against these screens is to drop way back to protect the paint, but because Jokic is so efficient from mid-range, that doesn't really work. So the Spurs tried helping him out. On this one, you're going to see Castle show to the ball while Wemby recovers, only for Jokic to kick it back out to Murray for an open corner 3. And that's actually how this game got sent to OT in the first place. After a timeout with 8 seconds left in the fourth, the Nuggets drew up a cross screen for Jokic to go get the ball in the post. Wemby gets hit, but he doesn't want to give up a switch, so he and Champagnie both go to Jokic, resulting in a free 2 points. For all of the post-ups and inverted screening actions though, Denver's offense is built around Jokic screening for the ball, and that two-man game puts Wemby into a bind, because he can't let Jamal walk into a layup, but that means giving up an open floater, so he's forced to pick his poison. On plays where he even thinks about helping on a drive, he risks giving up the push shot. That leads to plenty of possessions like this where he starts to pick up the ball, retreats to get back to the short roll, and gives up a layup. Or sometimes you'll see him stay closer to the screen and play the short roll first, then try to make a late recovery to the ball, and he doesn't always have the angle. Really, the only way he can play both the ball and the short roll is if he forces a pass, then sells out to get back, which is when Jokic uses that threat to create an even better shot. This problem isn't exclusive to pick and rolls. Wemby isn't able to help like he normally does in basically any situation. For example, when Aaron Gordon gets Trey Jones on an island, they clear out to attack the mismatch. And with Jokic on the perimeter, Wemby's willing to come over and help. But instead of staying put, he dives into the paint for a floater. This time Gordon initiates, and I'm not exactly sure what Wemby tried to do, but it created an opportunity for Jokic to drive off the catch. Victor gets back in time to cut him off, only for him to slam the brakes and drop it up and in with that soft touch. Essentially, he can't let Jokic out of his sight, which means his teammates no longer have the same room for error on the perimeter because he can't cover every mistake. And that comes full circle back to the post-ups. If he's stuck to Jokic's body, he's no longer in position to rotate and protect the rim. So the Nuggets are still able to get to their screening and cutting. Anytime there's a miscommunication or one of Denver's wings finds a tight window, they're still able to put that pressure on the rim. The entire idea here is that Jokic's short mid-range pressure limits what makes Wemby the most impactful defender in basketball. And it's the same thing in situations where San Antonio moves Victor off the ball to roam behind the play. Sure, he's in position to protect the rim, but what about the floater? With Wemby in the weak side corner, the Nuggets can just go to their usual offense. They might not get as many layups. They will, however, still have unlimited access to the mid-range. Not to mention post-up situations where Jokic is able to work against a mismatch, get deep in the paint, and float it up over the outstretched arm. Remember what I said about him being a master of timing. In these spots, he'll speed his process up a little bit to get the ball up and in before Wemby ever gets there, which leaves two options. Either they can send help from elsewhere, or they can bring Wemby over to Jokic's side of the floor as early as possible, which then puts pressure on the weak side, resulting in high-quality threes for shooters. Over the last 3 years, Jokic and Wemby have been on the court at the same time for a total of 181 minutes. And during that time, Jokic is scoring 36 points every 75 possessions on over 64% true shooting, in large part thanks to his short mid-range dominance, taking 10 of those shots at a 54% clip. Remember, the short mid-range, on average, generates 0.89 points per attempt, about 10 points below a typical half-court possession. In these matchups, Jokic has generated 1.08 points per attempt, which is about 10 points above that mark. Not to mention how his pressure on Wemby individually helps Denver get the optimal shot diet. When Victor's been on the court in his career, the Spurs have allowed 26 shots at the rim every 100 possessions while holding teams to 63% shooting. When he's been on the court against Jokic, they've allowed 32.5 shots at the rim on almost 70% shooting. So instead of holding teams to a 111 offensive rating, 4 points better than average, they've given up a 125, which would be far and away the worst defense in basketball. All of this is a function of Jokic dominating that one area of the court. Whether it's a drive, a post-up, when coming around a screen or screening himself, his ability to access the short mid-range with floaters, hooks, and jumpers whenever he wants at a near 60% clip is the ultimate counter to generational rim protection. So even though Wemby's a game-breaking defensive player, a one-man unit, every now and then we're reminded that Jokic is an even more game-breaking offensive player, someone who can stare down an alien and leave him without an answer.